Thank you for joining us today for this podcast when we're going to discuss the main findings from the mathematics thematic, which was unlocking potential, insights into improving teaching and leadership in mathematics education. I'm really excited to be joined today by three colleagues. We've got Sally and Tyler from a PANT school, and we've asked them to come along because we've seen aspects of high challenge, strong teaching and effective questioning. And also Libby, who's joining us from the Initial Teacher Education programme in Swansea University. And we've asked her to come along because we were very pleased to see the support that she gave student teachers for understanding curriculum for Wales and for ensuring that high quality teaching and learning in mathematics. So I'm going to pass over for you to introduce yourselves.
Hi, so I'm Libby Chancer. So I run the Maths PhD programme at Swansea University, which is Initial Teacher Education.
Hi, my name is Sally Owen. I'm Head of Maths at a PANT school.
Hello, I'm Tyler Olds. I'm Second in Maths at a PANT school.
Thank you. And I think the main messages coming out of the report are that whilst we observed some examples of effective teaching within mathematics, generally there was insufficient responsive teaching within maths classrooms, and overall pupil standards in maths were too low. And one of the things that we know that is really important for effective teaching of mathematics is that high expectation and appropriate level of challenge. And very often we see teachers misunderstanding that level of challenge doesn't just have to be harder questions done quicker, but it's actually about challenging, isn't it, those pupils just above the level at which they're working. So it's going to be really important that you understand where those pupils are. So I'm just wondering, as an opener, how do you make sure that staff and student teachers understand expectations are appropriate and provide that challenge to the pupils which is appropriate?
I think it's starting with understanding, as you said, what we mean by pace and challenge. And, pace and challenge doesn't just mean a busy classroom. And one of my colleagues sometimes says, sometimes you can get a bunch of kids doing a thing, they look engaged and active, but what are they actually engaging with? And it's that challenge isn't just bigger numbers or harder questions, but opportunities to develop conceptual understanding. So pushing understanding of mathematical structures, how they relate to one another, how they connect. So I think that's kind of our starting point. We understand what we're trying to develop in the classroom.
And for us, in the classroom, that's key. Where we've got this concept of developing the participation to thinking ratio, where we challenge pupils to develop their understanding instead of just learning procedural skill, linking concepts, or in those linking of concepts, understanding why those certain methods work and so on. So for us, instead of just teaching a set structure essentially to a question, which it could be the case where you could stand in the classroom, you could teach a structure and that would get pupils by. But for us, it's really key that we delve into that deep thinking and the understanding of the maths that we're showing them essentially.
Yes, and especially making it real life for them, because the question all the time is, why are we doing this, miss? What use is this going to be to me in real life? But obviously bringing in the real life applications, especially moving forward with the new GCSE now, I think the managing money section is going to be really, really important to the pupils.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And for us in terms of we can manage that in our own classrooms and we can, take ideas from departments, but how do we manage that across a whole school or a department level? Well, we've got really rigorous process in place for, developing teaching and learning, taking those opportunities to actively research. Part of our CPD is actively researching classroom techniques or new techniques, and also having the opportunity to go, well, I'm going to try it. And if it doesn't work, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But importantly for us, that's on a whole school level. But then we bring that back to the department. And then in department meetings, we discuss as a team, have you tried this? How has that worked? And then, bringing those whole school teaching and learning techniques into our department and then working collaboratively to develop resources, develop ideas, develop lessons and so on.
Being part of a big department, we're 12 staff in our department. So we've focused this year on consistency across the department, consistency in how we teach things, how we've got a massive quality assurance calendar in the department where we go out and we continually do learning walks, we continually do book looks. So we're making sure that the pupils, whoever their teacher is getting the same value for money, so to speak.
Absolutely.
It's really nice to hear Tyler talking about taking chances or being creative as a teacher. And that's so important, isn't it? And I think about you saying about the department and that development. So trying something with pupils.
Yeah.
I think it's all about the planning, isn't it? So you're planning something really carefully and you're thinking about what it affords your pupils, and then the role of the pupils and the teacher in how that's actualised. So how does that thinking develop in the classroom? What do we need to do? What do the pupils need to do?
That, yeah.
And then reflecting on that.
And for us, it isn't just an add-on. It isn't something that, we do to impress Estyn. It is something that genuinely we, as a whole school, but as a department as well, we lead this closer practice research. But then importantly, we don't just do it and then leave it. We delve into what have we found from that active research, and in terms of, challenge, pace and so on, what is the outcome, what are those outcomes meant? Were the pupils challenged? Or, okay, so we did this in a particular way that challenged them in that aspect, right? How can we then develop conceptual understanding? So, these active, the research that we take part in isn't just, we'll do it and then it never gets touched. We do delve into what have we found from this research. And again, in terms of pace and challenge, that is, a key, it's a key concept that we talk about a lot in the department. And then, albeit that that's an individual process, it's then developed on a department level,
Our focus as a whole department level this year was raising the bottom third of our pupils. So not necessarily bottom third of the year group. It could be the bottom third in your class, putting strategies in place and what we can do to engage the bottom third.
And that's important, isn't it? Challenge for all. It isn't just our most able. And I know that's a given in this room, but it's bottom third. It's moving those pupils that are on a G maybe up to an F.
Absolutely.
Or your D's to C's. It's a challenge for all.
Yeah, the pupils in Key Stage 3 are equally as important, aren't they? Making sure that they're improving. And I think something you said about not teaching procedural tricks or checklists or do this, out pops the answer. And I think if we think about the number of different things we would teach a pupil through their lifetime in the school, from when they're in primary all the way through to when they leave up their GCSEs or their A-levels, they would have so many things to have to remember. And that's going to develop into cognitive overload, isn't it? And it's far better to develop that understanding, even though sometimes you might find that your lessons are slightly slower in that respect. You're challenging, you're not accepting the first answer, are you? You're asking them, well, why? So that you as a teacher understand whether that pupil understood it or accidentally got the right answer.
So you can ask them, why did you do that? How do you know that's correct? Yeah. What can you do to check?
Provide non-examples as well of when it doesn't work and what will you do then and why doesn't it work?
And for me, one thing that I quite like to use in the classroom is I might set up a really basic example and, try and develop that conceptual understanding and then say, okay, if I change this, what's going to happen? And then just give pupils that forum then to discuss, because I think all too often, I think it's really easy for us to stand at the front and say, this is what we do, this is how we're going to do it, this is what I understand, but then not giving pupils the opportunity to go, right, I'm going to change this parameter in a certain way. How is that going to impact the answer? Or how is that going to impact the strategies we have to use to solve this problem? But giving them the opportunities to, have that discussion time.
Aspects of variation theory.
Absolutely.
And that's for us, a focus on structure, isn't it? So you're trying to focus students on the mathematical structures rather than the doing.
Rather than the process.
And we know as we move towards that structural understanding, the more we can do that, the more you're able to abstract in mathematics, which then helps you with the problem solving. So it's all interconnected.
Absolutely. And what you find so much in the classroom is if you develop that conceptual understanding, when you get to a certain topic, you have pupils then saying, but this is linked to this. And then, you can develop the understanding, yes, but why? Why is this linked to that? Or how is it linked? And then I think that's the key, that that you've developed that conceptual understanding, rather than this is how you do this. Yes. And I think it's so important that we have to move away from it now, because I know, and we've spoken about Key Stage 3, but you're thinking about Key Stage 4, when we think about examinations, we are moving away from this rote learning, being able just to get this set standard question. Pupils are expected now to take their knowledge and apply that knowledge to a new, maybe an unfamiliar context.
And it's important, isn't it, that we don't measure success just by the number of ticks that there are in a book. It's when they make those mistakes and they have those light bulb moments. And that's the same for teachers as well. If we're encouraging pupils to be able to make mistakes and to celebrate that, because that's when learning is happening, it should be the same as teachers. And I think, it's really important that teachers don't follow their lesson plan because they've got a lesson plan, but they utilise responsive teaching and think, well, actually, I'm going to stop you all there because the prior knowledge you needed isn't quite secure enough. Or actually, you've all understood this, so I'm going to move the learning forwards.
I think quite a few teachers are afraid of stopping the lesson because they're afraid of deviating away from their lesson plan. But that is teaching.
Yes, it is. And I would be very happy to see a teacher, practicing this responsive teaching and saying, do you know what? I'm not going to carry on. I'm not going to do that exercise because you've got this. I'm going to move the learning on. Or as I say, right, let's all stop for a minute. When we multiply decimals, what happens? And breaking that down.
I think that's a culture, isn't it? You're building a culture in your classroom. What are the pupils used to? And you can see in classrooms where the mathematical discourse, the way that you talk about mathematics, the way that mathematics is viewed has been developed, and that pupils are comfortable talking about structures, talking about ideas, getting things wrong.
Making mistakes.
We love a wrong answer. Oh, that's so interesting. We love a wrong answer. So important in a classroom. But that culture, I think, has to come and be modelled and led by the teacher.
The culture in my class is quite okay to make a mistake. We're in a room where I want you to make mistakes, because if you don't make mistakes, you're never ever going to learn.
No.
And it's to have that culture and for pupils to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because obviously there's a big hang up sometimes, isn't there, about maths, but the culture in my classroom is definitely everybody's allowed to make mistakes.
And I think that's we could badge that, couldn't we, as expectation. So, going with expectation within the classroom is that pupils are achieving as well as they should be achieving. But also within the school community is that, people don't say, oh, you're walking along the corridor, what's the matter, Sally? Oh, you've got maths. Don't worry, it's only an hour. In an hour, you've got break time or lunchtime. Or these things, I know. I know, or things like, don't worry, I was never very good at maths, but I've done all right for myself. And I think
it's the parents as well. It's the culture of the parents.
It's the whole community.
Absolutely.
You would never ever hear a parent come into parents' evening and saying, I can't read. But they're quite comfortable to sit down in front of you and say, oh, I was never any good at maths. He's following me. I can't do maths.
Yeah, and I think it's all of our role within a school, within ITE, within the community as parents, within Estyn, to actually promote that positivity, the understanding of the importance of it. And actually it's in the role of teachers to engage their pupils so that they become enthusiastic about it, but in a safe space where mistakes are valued and they're not treated as wrong answers. And I think that's really important. Something that you mentioned earlier on was variation theory, but if you just alter something and see what effect that has. So, for example, if you were working at the mean average of a set of numbers, what happens when each one of those numbers is increased by 1 or you add another number, particularly. And we know from the thematic that effective teaching or effective teachers use a variety of different approaches to developing that deeper understanding within maths. Is there anything else that you think you wouldn't be without? So, for example, your variation theory. I'm guessing mini whiteboards.
That's something big for me. As in, I think when your AFL is key in the classroom, that's the bottom line. But for me, AFL in terms of mini whiteboards is essential, because you can within 10 seconds easily pick off those students in the classroom who haven't quite understood what you're trying to get across. And I think also for me, a really, really key thing is, and I was really, really, I was guilty of this as a student myself. I wouldn't want to put something on paper if I knew or if I wasn't sure it was right. So for me, mini whiteboards in the classroom gives maybe those pupils that are not as confident the opportunity to try different things, try different methods, maybe experiment a little bit, but then have the knowledge of the fact that if it's wrong, okay, it's not there permanently. And albeit that might sound quite small, I think for some pupils, that's huge. And, having that opportunity to experiment, I think is key in the classroom.
And that's your responsive teaching, isn't it? When you can see who understands and what they do and don't understand, that's when you can adjust in real time, and when you're planning for the next in the series of lessons that you're doing.
And when you're going around the room and while they're working and you come across, they've done it wrong. This pupil has done exactly the same. So you stop the whole class and you say, right, let's take it back to the front. It's that.
Maybe it's the way I've communicated. Maybe it's something I've said, a word I've used, and let's unpick that.
And in all of our teaching, and it's certainly something that's embedded in our department, is the word progress. So progress, and then the next question is ultimately, how do you know? Well, if you're using those AFL techniques of mini whiteboards in your lesson, this is what I want pupils to be able to do. Here's the evidence in terms of, and that's for no one else other than yourself, in terms of that responsive teaching idea, where if the whole class have, they've developed that concept, they developed that skill, it's important to give them that opportunity to then develop that skill independently. But then as a teacher, if ultimately at the start of the lesson, you can see that pupils are, are nearly there, is thinking, right, what's the next steps? How can I stretch and challenge them? What questions can I ask that will deepen thinking and so on?
Yeah. And I bet when you're using your mini whiteboards, I'm sure that they are producing solutions, or if there's just a number, then there's follow-on probes, and like prompts and questioning. So I suppose it's the way with anything, it's the way that you use it in the classroom as well makes a difference, doesn't it?
Of course it does. You want it to be effective. There's no point in just using mini whiteboards for the sake of using them.
Absolutely.
No. And getting those routines. So I know some teachers are a little bit nervous about using them and they think pupils are going to doodle on them, etc. But if you establish those routines to start with, that these are for a particular use, then it makes it a lot easier. What else would you say is, we've talked a little bit about variation theory, varying one thing and seeing what happens, and mini whiteboards. What other aspects of responsive teaching do you use? Do you use things like diagnostic questions?
So we've changed our home scheme of learning this year. So before we teach any topic of work, all the pupils now do a diagnostic check. So we can see what they know before we actually start teaching. So that then enables us to, what they don't know, go into starters. And then that feeds into our lessons going forward.
Diagnostic questions can be so powerful. One of the things we do with the trainee teachers is they do a research project. So it's in their second term, and when they're a little bit more comfortable in school, and many of them focus on misconceptions in mathematics, because we know it really is at the heart of teaching and learning mathematics. So the idea is, well, what does the research tell us? Because there's a wealth of research out there that will, if you've never been in a classroom before as a trainee teacher, that really highlights some of those key misconceptions. And I know that teachers draw on these as well. And the idea is that you create a diagnostic test that highlights the misconceptions your class has. You then teach them over a sequence of lessons, and then you test them again to see if you've made, hopefully, an impact. Hopefully there's been an improvement. But one of the really important parts of that is about them being critical about why. So what's improved? Why? What hasn't improved? Why? So it's that, it never stops, does it, as teachers? It's always that reflection and then making progress for us as well as the pupils.
Yes, and I think there, within the report, there are spotlights that you can see for how well whiteboards can be used for diagnostic questions, for variation theory, effective questioning, etc. But I think, sometimes when we use mini whiteboards, we are guilty of just saying, right, I'm going to give you 4 options, A, B, C and D. One of those is the correct answer. What's your answer? Yeah. Rather than maybe taking a couple of minutes more, a couple of seconds more, maybe in your joint planning saying, well, what would be the questions that would elicit those misconceptions? So if you were looking at working out the area of a rectangle, making sure that one of those answers didn't have the correct units, for example, making sure one of them you could get the answer by finding the perimeter, so you might be misunderstanding.
Absolutely. Yes.
Those sorts of things, so that when you say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, show me, and the pupils show you, you actually can say not just how many got it right and how many got it wrong, but are there any misconceptions, individual misconceptions or class-wide misconceptions, which then really helps to inform the next direction of the next input you would have.
I think it informs talk as well. Talk in the classroom is so important.
Absolutely.
And it's planning for it. When are we planning for talk? Who talks about what and for how long, and then that responsive. So actually we need to talk about this now. Yes. So maybe as a pair or a group, and then as a whole class. And I think that language and discussion is a scaffold to that sense making. You know, we've talked about structures. Well, actually moving pupils there, one of those things is about talking about the mathematics that helps pupils get there.
Yeah. And I think one thing you've just all spoken about are misconceptions as well. And I think, you know, where we see the most effective teaching, we'll see collaboration between student teachers, between teachers, to actually identify what experiences are going to be the main misconceptions, and actually plan in your planning to address those, rather than waiting and then thinking next lesson, what will I do to address those? Is that something, because you said you do collaborative planning? Yeah,
that's key for us in terms of, you know, it's twofold really, in terms of your own teaching, planning for those misconceptions, thinking about how you can get those misconceptions across. So for me, it would be thinking about, right, what question am I going to pose that's really going to highlight this strongly and, you know, make the point that I'm making. But in terms of student teachers, for example, where I think it's really important that they, well, for us, when they come to us, they spend a lot of time observing different lessons and across a variety of different subjects as well in some cases, or certainly across different year groups, different ability levels and so on. And I think for us, it's really important they see all the different ways that members in our department, for example, plan for misconceptions or plan, you know, certain hinge questions in the lesson that really highlight those key, you know, those key ideas that we want to get across in terms of misconceptions. But for us, collaboratively, we spend a lot of time in our departments together, structuring resources, building time, talking about maybe misconceptions we've found with certain exam questions or certain topics. So, Sally mentioned that we've changed our schemes of learning over the last year. Some of the topics maybe we haven't put as much emphasis on previously, and now that we are, we're kind of seeing what types of misconceptions are coming out. Or maybe that's on a year group level. A particular year group, for example, we've had disruption to teaching. What misconceptions do they have, or what gaps in their learning do they have? Collaborative work essentially for us is.
We've looked at straight line graphs. It's everybody's favourite topic to teach, and you know what works for you. How can we go about this? Because every time an exam question or a topic comes up on there, pupils just seem to struggle with finding the equation of a straight line. So we're looking for ways of how we can develop in the department.
I think straight line graphs, that brings, I suppose, something that I'm sure you guys do a lot of is there's multiple representations. So, you know, you have an equation, but you could represent it as an area. You can represent it as a straight line graph. You can think of it as a function machine. And I suppose it's trying to represent structures in different ways to try and help pupils understand and see them as a structure.
Again, it comes back to that conceptual understanding rather than just saying the number in front of the x means the gradient, the number on the end means the y-intercept. You know, it's building that knowledge of how those structures are related. Just as an example, I've got a 9 Set 1 class at the moment, and we were solving quadratic equations and saying, right, what does this mean geometrically? What does this mean? If I draw a graph, what does this mean? And I think some of them were blown away by the fact of what it actually means. But I think for them, it's really important that not only do they build their algebraic skills in solving something like quadratic equations, but they understand the link. How does it link geometrically? Or if we're solving simultaneous equations, what does that mean? Again, you might know the method, but what does your answer actually mean? If I was to say, right, interpret this geometrically, could you do it? And for me, that's bringing those different structures together is ultimately the key in building conceptual understanding.
And I think, it's really important that we all remember that when we evaluate whether teaching is effective, all we're looking at is whether the pupils are making effective progress, really. And I think very often those things that we see that teachers do that don't have the impact that they would wish that they had come from maybe a lack of confidence in their own subject knowledge as teachers, or their understanding in how pupils learn. They plan the lesson rather than planning for the learning. So they might plan a series of activities and hope that pupils make progress, rather than saying, at the end of this lesson, I would like my pupils to be able to do this. And the best way to do that is by doing that. And that's very similar to the comment that in the report that says about, bought-in schemes of learning. Nothing wrong with those, as long as you choose those aspects that elicit the learning, rather than just slavishly saying, this is lesson 1, day 1, this is day 2 of that and that topic. And when we came to Swansea, Libby, we saw the work that you were doing with the trainee teachers to actually help them to understand that they were planning for learning rather than planning a lesson. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the main things is about developing a culture. So a culture where trainee teachers see mathematics as interconnected structures, where they focus on developing a concept rather than just doing. And we really want trainee teachers to buy into our vision and our philosophy of maths education. And I think one of the main ways to develop that is through modelling. We're trying to model effective practice. We're trying to model what we'd like to see in the classroom when we go out to see trainee teachers. So where is talk in the classroom? What are the opportunities for discussion? When are we leading from the front? When are the trainee teachers leading? How are we informing what we do? So a lot of that is also connected to research and justifying pedagogical choices. So we obviously don't teach, this is how you teach fractions to year 7. We talk about, well, what are the principles of teaching and learning? What are the principles of teaching and learning fractions? How do we build a concept? So it's, as you were saying, it's not about planning a lesson, it's about planning learning. How do you plan for that learning? And, also then obviously those connections to Curriculum for Wales. What are our proficiencies? How do they inform? How are we planning for those? So if we think about an example of planning a worksheet, so on the surface, it sounds really straightforward, but there's so many elements that go into that.
It's a very complex process, isn't it?
It really is. You think about progression, you think about challenge, you think about scaffolding, you think about, well, are you doing it as an individual or with a pair or in a group? Are there connections? We talked earlier about connecting to other areas of mathematics. Are there worded questions? There's so many things to think about. And I think trainee teachers need space to have that thinking time like pupils do in a classroom. And then about connecting theory and practice. They can try something out. They can make mistakes. They can have feedback from each other, from myself. And then just to finish that, I think it's about being in a wider culture. So I think the maths PGCE sits within our ITE. And as you know, our culture is research-informed, reflective practitioners. And I know that my mathematicians, if they're in a lead lecture or if they're in a network event, they're getting that same culture, that same message. And I also know that if one of my student teachers goes out to a pant and Tyler's their mentor, that Tyler's also reinforcing that same culture, that same message.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Sally is with the whole department.
And that's what you will find is if you come to a PAN, you would find that culture on a whole school level as well as on a department level. So there is a significant amount of work and a lot of time put into becoming that research reformed reflective practitioner, having the opportunities to conduct close practice research. But importantly for us, researching those teaching and learning techniques or, having the opportunity to do that in the classroom, but also for us is researching how does learning happen, understanding things like cognitive overload, understanding how, certain practices suit certain learners and so on. So on a school level, that is driven quite highly, and it's thought really highly from staff as well. It's key for us. It's key in embedding that. You've spoken about a culture, Libby. We have that research culture at a PANT, and now we're extending on to that idea of how does learning happen rather than just understanding certain techniques.
And that brings us on nicely, doesn't it, to professional learning, really. And, how do we give teachers more confidence? So to reduce that variability in the quality of teaching, we need teachers to have confidence, to have good subject knowledge, good understanding of how pupils learn maths. And a lot of that's down to the work that you do collaboratively, either within ITE or within your departments in your schools, but also down to the external and internal professional learning. And generic professional learning is important, but then what about the maths-specific professional learning? Because, maths is a special case as well. What do you think has the best impact on improving that confidence in teachers?
I was going to say that, like in our school, general professional learning takes precedence, doesn't it? It's very infrequently that we have time to sit and have maths professional learning, and it's very infrequent if we do, and very generic.
Yeah. And there is a place for that, isn't there? There is a place for developing those generic teaching skills.
Those are the non-negotiables, I'd say.
Our sessions mainly focus on exam preparation, data analysis, rather than the pedagogy or subject knowledge, which I think as a department going forward we do require.
So what do you think we need within the system more generally?
So just to add on to Sally's comment as well, as in for us, I think it's key to understand that sometimes, yes, we are the maths professionals, we teach maths, but also there are other subjects and other departments in the school that have that responsibility to, number one, teach numeracy skills, but also to develop the numeracy skills that we teach, but in a different context. Yeah. So we do, on a body of staff, we collaboratively work together in terms of delivering how we teach a certain topic, or having the opportunity to discuss as a department how we teach to analyse graphs or draw graphs. And for us, it's about developing a consistent approach that we use across departments, so that when a pupil goes from a maths lesson to a physics lesson, the messages are consistent across, those teacher messages are consistent.
That's really important.
I think with developing teacher autonomy, in Curriculum for Wales, and having that space which provides real opportunities, but then also that support that needs to come with that. And I think close to practice research should really be central. And I think it would be great to have a maths research network where teachers are supported. And I know lots of really great activities happening. Like Tyler, you talked about some of the work that you're doing in a PANT, and I know it's happening, across Wales. But I think more opportunities for support in undertaking research. And I know as teachers, we kind of engage in research anyway, don't we? As in informal, the nature of teaching is research informed. You plan something, you deliver it, you collect data in your class, and then you think about the changes that you're going to make.
Evaluate.
Yeah. Of course you do. But I think having that support to kind of formalise a small scale, larger scale, and then sharing some of that is so important within school and across schools as well. So I think that could really be something we could look at to develop.
I think that's key for me, across schools, because I think we're not all doing things perfectly. And I think different schools have got different strengths.
Absolutely.
And what we found working collaboratively with schools, where there are some things that we thought we weren't particularly, strong at. So we've gone out to other schools, we've evaluated how they've, approached a certain aspect. and actually come back to a plant and have taken those ideas, that knowledge of how it's worked, and run with it. So I think it's really important that we work collaboratively, but we don't necessarily have the time to do that, amongst our busy teaching schedules.
I also feel like most teachers in Wales at the moment are trying to reinvent the wheel, and we don't need to be. We need to be sharing. What's the point in everybody doing exactly the same thing? Because at the end of the day, we all want what's best for the kids.
Yeah, and it's all about improving standards of pupils' mathematical skills.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, thank you all very much. It's been really nice to spend however long we've spent today just talking about maths and talking about some of the main findings from the thematic, and I'm really grateful to you. And thank you to everybody as well who's joined us for this podcast. If you want any more information, and we have within the thematic, there are spotlights and there are video clips of effective practice. If you want to know any more, please feel free to go to the Estyn website and to read the thematic. But once again, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.